Nachhaltigkeit feministisch.
Sustainability, the feminist way.
Welcome to the fourth and last episode of our audio series Nachhaltigkeit feministisch, Sustainability, the feminist way, in which we ask ourselves the question, what gender equality has to do with sustainable development and how a feminist lens on questions of sustainability can help us understand more profoundly the multiple social, economic and ecological challenges we're facing today. My name is Diana Simic. I'm a member of the Sustainability Studies Project UniNEtZ, and I'm coming together today with my dear friend and colleague Sujata Subramanian from the Center for Interdisciplinary Gender Studies at the University of Innsbruck in order to reflect upon feminist utopias of sustainability. The genre feminist utopia has actually been well described by feminist literary and cultural studies scholars, and in one of the classic definitions by Carol Pearson, for example, two criteria are listed. The first one is that feminist utopia criticizes patriarchy, and the second one is that feminist utopia depicts a world that is good for women as a marginalized group, or as one of many marginalized groups, we can rather say. Sujata, I'm happy to sit here with you and talk about a feminist utopia depicted in a literary text that both of us hold dear. Let's share with our listeners what inspired us.
Thank you, Diana, and I'm so happy to be sitting here in conversation with you about feminist utopias. I remember that one of our very first conversations when we met each other was about Sultana's Dream. And what is special about Sultana's Dream is that it's been described by Roshan Jahan as one of the earliest self-consciously feminist utopian stories written in English by a woman. So the text was written by Rokeya Hussain and published in 1905. And it was first published in Indian Ladies magazine, which is an English periodical published in colonial India.
The story is actually so interesting because it depicts Sultana, a young woman, who falls asleep on her armchair and wakes up in a place called Ladyland, which is, as the name says, a place that is completely run by women. Women are in charge of all matters, and men are secluded at the same time. Sultana has a local guide in this land where she wakes up, whose name is Sister Sarah, and Sister Sarah leads her through this strange land that is so different from the society that Sultana is used to. And Sister Sarah introduces her to Ladyland's peculiarities. So what kind of place is that? Ladyland is a place that values technology the same way it values nature. Ladyland's inhabitants draw water from the atmosphere, for example. They collect heat from the sun. The cities are big gardens where there is no traffic or pollution. The women are highly educated. Refugees are not turned out. There is not even police or a magistrate. There's so much in this text that is so inspiring, that is so interesting and so path-breaking. What would you say were your favorite sections in Sultana's Dream, Sujata?
What stood out to me in Sultana's Dream is the emphasis on women of Ladyland being women of science. And some of my favorite bits from the story are, where Sister Sarah talks about the women in Ladyland drawing solar energy, for example, to win a war. And we're told that this is a war where there are no loss of lives. We're also told that the scientific expertise of the women of Ladyland also made Ladyland a land free of epidemic disease. I also love that the Queen of Ladyland is someone who's fond of botany, and she talks about aspiring to make the whole country into a grand garden. And to me, this is what makes Ladyland not just a feminist utopia, but also decolonial utopia. Because keep in mind that at the time that the story was written, India was under the British Empire, and it was undergoing very large-scale ecological destruction. The kind of science and technology that was prevalent within such a practice of colonialism or within this history of colonialism was one where the relationship with nature was an extractive one. It was about the commodification of nature. It was about bringing lands and seas into control, to build bridges, to build dams. But what Sultana's dream, which was written at this time, is giving us is that it's giving us a vision that is about beauty. It's about a vision of science that is premised on the well-being of the inhabitants of Ladyland. And it's not about the control of nature, but about a harmonious relationship between nature and people. What about you, Diana? Which are some of your favorite bits?
It's really hard to choose, but one of the things that actually stuck with me was the way that work is depicted in Sultana's dream. By the way that work is defined in Ladyland. So the ladies of Ladyland, the inhabitants of Ladyland, only work a few hours a day, and the rest of their time they spend in more creative, more nurturing, and ultimately really more sustainable ways. So they work in the garden, they cook in the communal kitchen, which is outside under the skies in the beautiful vegetable garden. They're doing embroidery, they're knitting and doing needlework. So they're actually doing all sorts of work that usually, especially within capitalist circumstances, is not considered to be productive. And the inhabitants of Ladyland have time and take time for education, for walks, for conversations, for actually also nurturing their souls. And if we speak now in feminist terms, they actually put an emphasis on so-called reproductive labor, by taking care of themselves, by taking care of each other, by taking care of their physical and mental well-being, and also by taking care of the natural resources that they have access to. So I really, really enjoy reading about this vision of labor because it does feel more purposeful.
It's interesting that you bring this up because the conversations around how long a work week should be something that we're still talking about today. So in some senses, it's incredible how visionary a text that was written 120 years ago was, right? And in some ways, it's even more remarkable that this was written at a time when women all over the globe were still being kept away from institutions of learning. But in some ways, I guess it's also not surprising because some of the most revolutionary, the most transformative visions of utopia have historically come from people who have been subjected to oppression, whether it's Indigenous people, whether it's women of color, queer artists and writers, or like in the case of Sultana's dream, writers from the global south. And we see this with writers like Ursula Le Guin, Octavia Butler, or even, we've spoken about Chitra Ganesh, who's an Indian American artist who explores the idea of feminist utopia through sculpture and video. And so I bring this up because when you think about how the standpoints of those who are experiencing the effects of living in a world that's ravaged by patriarchy, that's ravaged by racism and colonialism, then the ability to imagine alternative worlds becomes an act of survival, right? The ability to imagine worlds where the promise of justice and liberation are possible are acts of resistance. As one of our favorite writers, Audre Lorde, said, the future of our earth may depend upon the ability of all women to identify and develop new definitions of power and new relations across difference.
This is such a beautiful quotation, and I think we really take it very seriously and also try to transform this into our work as academics who are critical of the exclusive structures that we are working in. And this is also the reason why we want to draw inspiration from feminist utopias, also as a means of knowledge production. So we want to ask ourselves the question, what happens when we think of knowledge production as an act of solidarity, collaboration and dialogue? And in this spirit, in this vision of knowledge production as something collaborative and dialogical, that feminist utopia actually asks us to imagine, we also invited some of our colleagues to share their visions of feminist utopias of sustainability with us. In the next section, you're going to hear statements. The first one is by Tanuja Harad, a researcher on menstrual and reproductive health from WADA, India. The second one is by Lidia Krinca-Radojevic from the cultural workers advocacy group IG Kultur Steiermark, Austria.
Hello, I am Tanuja Harad. I have been working in the field of menstrual and sexual reproductive health in India for 4 years. I have a master's in gender, culture, and development studies from India. I got interested in the field of menstrual and sexual reproductive health because of my personal experiences, both my own and my mother's. My mother underwent hysterectomy at a very young age. I also had menstrual pain from the age of 16. But my experiences with doctors were frustrating because they did not take my pain seriously. They would tell me that my pain would go after childbirth. This is an experience of many women. There is also a lack of research about women's bodies and women's experiences not being considered important within medical research and therefore receiving far less funding. Even if there is research, it is most around women's ability to give birth. But we see very little research on women's pain and on conditions like endometriosis. I finally underwent surgery for adenomyosis at the age of 30 after 15 years of suffering from severe pain. I believe that this would not be the case if there were more women in science and if we had women researchers and women in places of decision making. Whatever little progress there has been in research on reproductive health has been because of the feminist movements and the push to have more women in science. We see this in Sultana's Dream, where we not only see women in public sphere but also women as scientists. And if the story could be expanded, I wonder if we would learn about how women's health looked different in Ladyland. Interestingly, Sultana's Dream was a text that I read as part of my master's course in gender studies. Even though the text was written 100 years ago, it is still so relevant. Women continue to be confined, and we see the worst of this with regards to women in prisons. I recently did a project on menstrual hygiene of women in prisons in Kolkata, a city in India. What I would say is that these spaces are the opposite of the feminist utopia. Of course, some people would say that it is only women who commit crimes who are in prisons and not all women. Some people would say that putting women who commit crimes in prisons is a form of justice. But what I found in my research is that a large percentage of women in prisons are there for minor and non-violent crimes, for things that they did for basic survival or because of poverty. 3 out of 4 women in prisons are under trials, meaning that we don't even know if they committed crime. And 7 out of 10 women come from marginalized backgrounds, including working class, oppressed caste, and Muslim backgrounds. I would ask the listeners, if prisons are actually about justice, then why is it that it is marginalized women who are being punished more? And I can say that this is true not just for India but for countries around the world. In my research, we also found that the punishment that women in prisons receive is not just about locking them up, but they also don't get the basic minimum resources they need for their survival. These women don't have access to adequate number of bathrooms and toilets, access to good quality menstrual products, access to clean drinking water, and they do not have access to adequate healthcare services. What my own experiences with menstrual health and my research on menstrual health of women in prisons has taught me is that to build a better world, we need to take women's knowledge seriously. We need to listen to what women are telling about their bodies. We need more women in science because only then focus on women's health will be given importance. And we need to rethink our current ideas of justice, which punish marginalized women for trying to survive. We need to think about the violence of prisons also in terms of the harm to women's health. For me, A feminist utopia can only be built if we center the voices of marginalized people in our conversations about reproductive justice.
Upanje je kakor ogenj, ob katerem se greješ, če je vse naokoli mrzlo. Dokler smo se borili proti Hitlerju, smo verovali, da bo na Koroškem kmalu zavladala pravica. Iz te moke ni bilo kruha. Zdaj moramo varovati žerjavico, da nam popolnoma ne ugasne. Iz nje bo morda nekoč spet vzplametel ogenj. Če je ne bomo čuvali, nam ostane samo mrzel pepel. To so besede Helene Kuha, partizanke Jelke, v njenih spominih, ki hoče s svojim pričevanjem uliti upanje in pogum vsem njenim zanamkam in zanamcem in hoče nam povedati, da je upanje tisto, na katerem sloni bodočnost in boj za nekaj boljšega. Leta 2020, še pred izbruhom korone, smo se v Gracu, v forumu Stadtparku spraševali, kaj je utopija danes in kje je njeno mesto danes. Potem je izbruhnila korona in vse se je na glavo obrnilo. Življenje vseh nas je popolnoma novo pot ubralo. Vse se je naenkrat ustavilo, naenkrat smo bili vsi vrženi iz ustaljenih rutin in v tem trenutku je vprašanje utopije dobilo nov zagon in nek nov kontekst. Vsi smo imeli izkušnjo, kaj pomeni, ko smo naenkrat ogroženi. Kaj je pomembno? Kaj je tisto, zakaj živimo in zakaj hočemo tudi živeti in kako hočemo živeti. Spomnim se, da smo se povsod gledali plakate Schau auf dich, schau auf andere. Ta lepa sporočila so probala vlivati tudi neko upanje in hotel vzbuditi neko solidarnost med ljudmi. A z današnjega pogleda leta 2024 v Avstriji vidimo, da je tako kot je to, se vse drugače obrnilo in iz Schau auf andere je nastal bolj ali manj Scheiß auf andere in danes smo tukaj, kje smo. A če se vrnem na Jelko in na njeno pričevanje in predvsem na njeno sporočilo v odseku, ki sem ga prebrala, lahko rečemo, da ravno zaradi današnje situacije in tudi navkljub vsemu, ki proti temu govori, je potrebno ponovno premisliti, kje so naše utopije in kaj so naše utopije. Kam trebamo se obrniti in kje najti našo žerjavico in kako jo čuvati, da nas bo v teh mrzlih časih grela in nam svetila v bodočnost. Tako kot Jelka svoja partizanska leta opisuje, ena od glavnih vodil boja, partizanskega boja, je bila skrb. Skrb zase, skrb za druge. Ampak v avtentični, nezglagani formi. In ta skrb je držala tako njo kot mnoge, da so se lahko upirali grozni realnosti. Gre za eno medsebojno zaupanje, medsebojno skrb zase in seveda medsebojno ljubezen, osvobojeno patriarhalnih spon, osvobojeno pozicij moči. In to bi rekla, če danes hočemo kakorkoli družbo ohraniti v eni demokratični formi in tudi se za nek družbeni mir boriti, potem so to osnovni in najpomembnejši temelji, na katerih lahko gradimo in na ta način upamo, da bo ta žerjavica enkrat spet splametela v ogenj.
In this statement, Lidija Krinca-Radojević quotes the Corinthian Slovenian partisan Helena Kuhar-Jelka, who talks about hope being a flame, being a fire, that no matter how small, keeps us warm even in the coldest of circumstances. Lidija reflects upon the pandemic years we have experienced since 2020, and since then, she sees that the principle schau auf dich, schau auf andere, translated as look out for yourself, look out for others, has actually transformed into scheiß auf andere, very freely translated as don't give a shit about others. Acknowledging the difficult times that we live in, Lidija asks the question, if we take this into account, what does our utopia look like today? And again, she goes back to the partisan struggle, to the anti-fascist struggle during Second World War, whose main principle was the principle of care. Caring for yourself, caring for others. Lidija reminds us that the struggle that came before us, all the struggles that came before us, actually provide us with hope for a future that is defined by solidarity and love.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that we spoke about the work they're doing, because even though this episode started with our love for Sultana's dream, what their work is telling us is that the work of building a feminist utopia is our work. It's not just about artistic work. It's not just a literary genre. It's about building solidarities and relationships of love and care with those who are already engaged in the work of building a feminist utopia. Because if we look around us, we will find so many examples of people who are resisting and struggling against structures of patriarchy, against white supremacy, imperialism, fascism. And like Lidija's words remind us, our job is to join them in building these utopias and build relationships and communities of love, care, and solidarity.
With these hopeful words, we would like to end our audio series Nachhaltigkeit feministisch, Sustainability the Feminist Way. Our names are
Sujata Subramanian
and Diana Simic. Thank you for listening.
Nachhaltigkeit feministisch.
Sustainability, the feminist way.